Alright, so this is going to be the next video that we're making. Um, it's going to be team success. What does a team need to be successful? These are the categories that we're going to go through. I'm going to touch on some of them. Obviously, you see here attitude and time utilization are the biggest ones. Support staff is not necessary, I guess, for lower T3 teams, but once you start getting into high T3 and stuff, might as well touch on that point. This is going to be I don't have any intros. I don't have any kind of graphics or anything like that. So we're going to be staring at this screen. I'm not going to be running through T Hunt or clips or anything like that while we're doing this because it's distracting and we want to get the most out of this time. So if this is boring for you, you probably shouldn't be here and that's fine. So the first one we're going to be talking about is attitude. We got 4 categories: ego, respect, professionalism, positivity. A lot of the things you might be seeing on here are things that aren't touched in other videos. I see a lot of people out there putting out content on, how to make an individual better, like how to do Vaude reviews. There's all kinds of other stuff, but I almost never see a couple of these things touched in here. And a lot of these come into play in all levels of the game. There's plenty of pro players or CL players who have somehow gotten there with ego problems, and it's widely known through the community. Respect, But anyway, focusing up, this video should be pretty short as long as I don't get sidetracked. So ego, I could tell you pretty much the majority of teams that I've done reviews for in T3 have an ego slash attitude problem. There's plenty of players out there who are as mechanically skilled as Bolo or possibly Shaco, whatever pro you want to fill in. Like there's plenty of players out there that are as good as pros mechanically, but they're never going to be there because of their attitude. Whether it's teams won't pick them up because of their attitude, or they're just not smart enough to overcome that type of thinking. Whatever the reason, there's plenty of players out there is mechanically skilled, but they're just never going to make it, whether they want to or they just can't because of whatever reason. Um, so I understand the game's competitive, people get passionate, all of that is fine, right? But there needs to be a limit as to where you stop so that you don't, because again, this is a team game, right? So if we're thinking about team atmosphere, it doesn't matter whether it's football, whatever it is that you've ever done in your life that is team oriented. Never in any of those aspects, including a real job, has there ever been a situation where if somebody fucks up, you're just like berating them for fucking up, right? There's no situation out there where that will be useful to the team in any way. So, not really sure why people have come to that conclusion in games, for example, but especially competitive. This is a ranked mindset. I played plenty of solo queue. Everybody here has played solo queue, and for some reason, there's always those guys in rank that are treating their teammates like that. And then people get exactly what happens in competitive. People start arguing, people get toxic, team play goes down the drain, you lose the game. It's that simple. And so they carry this same mindset over to competitive play. They never move away from it, which is pretty outstanding to me. Like that's the mindset, because if you think about it, when you transition from ranked to competitive, it's literally like a whole brand new game, right? So why would you change your game style of how you play the game? Like if you're a roamer or you're an entry or you're a droner, whatever those position is that you play, but then you don't change your actual mindset. You carry that same mindset over of toxicity. Not sure why people do that, but if this is the first time you're hearing this, I hope you really take that to heart, because any team that wants to be successful needs to steer clear of that way of thinking. So if you think about yourself, your team in a scrim or a league match, and they're, let's say 0-3, 0-4, people start arguing and getting upset with each other. How can you expect to change the momentum of the game when you're at that point, right? So that's where you need to just remove ego out of the equation. And I know this is like just an outlandish thing to say to some people, but I guarantee that if you can remove ego from the equation of this game, that your team will start becoming much better at a much faster pace, because it's just taking up so much of your like energy, and it's just there's no good explanation for it. But so we'll move on to respect. This is, obviously carrying off of ego. If you're This is a big problem, is that, and I don't think anybody ever talks about this. I've never really seen anybody talk about this. I could be mistaken, but um, if you're gotten into this ranked mindset and you can't transition from ranked to competitive, then it's going to hurt your team competitive wise, right? So if we're talking about the game is being grind heavy, and your team is coming in, let's say 4 to 6 days a week to scrim, review, dry run, whatever you guys are doing, you have to respect those players for showing up, right? Because everybody who's watching this video and has played comp long enough or is getting into comp, you're going to learn this lesson as well, is that you're going to get on these teams who either never play the game outside of practice, or they're consistently late to practices, like 15, 20 minutes late. The whole team's sitting there waiting to start scrims. Other people got plans, and you got this guy who's always late 15, 20 minutes. So first of all, you don't want those guys on your team. I don't care how good they are mechanically. If they're not committed to the team, again, this is a team, then, they can go find a team that's not as committed to the game if your team has goals. Like there's no one who's good enough out there, if this is a consistent problem with them, that needs to be on your team, especially in these situations. So going back to my original point, is that if you're doing 4 to 6 days a week of this type of thing, then there's no room for disrespecting each other. Like, you have to respect each other, because there are players out there who don't show up, all this stuff, right? So they're valuable assets to have on your team. Even if your team is not where you want it to be right now, like if your goal is to get to CL and you're mid T3, right? If everybody on your team has this way of thinking, where they're coming in, they're doing practices, they're showing up to practices, they're committed, they're practicing on their own time to improve their own individual things. Even if you're not where you want to be right now, it's just a matter of time till you get there with these mindsets. And I see teams that are way too impatient with this type of thing, and they don't want to wait to ride that train out, which is funny, because they'll jump from one team to the next team, and then that team will grind for 6 months or 3 months, and then they'll disband. And so you just continue on this train of cycling through rosters, and you never really get anywhere, because again, you never took the step back, reflected on what's important, what's actually valuable to this type of teamwork, team play. And they never learn from that, and they just continue down this rabbit hole, if you want to call it. So anyway, I would say that if you have any players like that, and that kind of work ethic, you got to respect them. So in game, when people mess up, everybody makes a mistake. I guarantee if I did a Vaude review for any team, there's not one player on the team that is perfect, right? Every single player is making multiple mistakes, especially at the T3 level. So I'm not sure where people get into that position of where they think they're superior or smarter than others. If you think, if you, and this is where the whole respect and ego thing come into play, if you think that you're better than everybody else just because you can get 15 kills in a game, or maybe you're potentially slightly smarter than the rest of your team, but you're not using that to your advantage to grow them, to build them up, then you're one of the biggest failures on the team. Because if you have the most tools and you're not helping the other players improve and grow, then you're probably one of the worst players on the team, right? Because that's like the worst team play outlook you can have for any team. So that's pretty much, the whole respect thing is pretty self-explanatory, but I wanted to touch on it because, I almost see no one ever talk about that type of thing. So professionalism's the next thing on this list, which I guarantee almost no one ever talks about. Is if we talked about ego and respect, right? So when you go into a scrim and you're talking about scrim or league match, it's best to avoid any kind of blaming, any kind of getting upset, heated, any of these things. If you can always keep a calm mind, then you're always going to play better. Your team is always going to play better, and I understand that's a hard, bumpy road to overcome. Like this is really hard stuff to uh, overcome altogether, and it's going to take time. You're not going to watch this video and go out to your scrim tonight or tomorrow, and all these problems are going to be fixed. This is going to be a constant daily battle. But if you're working on these things, and it's only going to become better for your team at a faster pace, right? So professionalism, we're talking about when you're in a scrim, you can maybe crack a couple jokes here or there. You should be focusing on the game, what's coming, what's happening in the game, what operators they have, what their setup is. There's so many more things that you can focus on and keep it professional. And then when the game is over, you can talk about like, bro, you should have seen this crazy kill I got. It was a crazy, I quick peeked this. You can show each other clips, you can do all that, and you can have fun after the game. But in the game, you want to keep focused on your goal. What's your task? How do you accomplish them? How do you become more efficient? Like, this is a very overlooked thing that like I said, nobody ever talks about, nobody ever touches on. But it's very important because if you can keep that mindset in scrims and league matches, you guys are going to do so much better, right? Overall. So that's something that I would really touch on, but obviously the two bigger ones in this case is ego and respect. Next one is positivity. Um, this is an unbelievable point, right? Again, I don't know if people just don't think about this type of stuff, or if they, they think about it, but they just never work on it. I don't know what the problems are with people in this game, but positivity is one of the most important things because, again, this game is morale boosted, right? Or like momentum. So if you're any game that you're in, if you're losing and everybody's being negative, you could never possibly achieve the max potential of your team's play, right? Because there's people arguing, there's people blaming, so you'll never reach that point of the best that you guys can play. And that's why you see such inconsistency, especially in T3, is that one game you guys will come in a day, one day you'll come in and you'll play phenomenal and it's all like everybody's in high spirits, it's going well. The next day you guys come in and maybe a guy on the team has had a bad day or whatever, and the team play is just total garbage and people are arguing and stuff like that. And you get into this inconsistent thing, right? So I, you know, there's limited things I can see or watch of pro comms. Bolo has some videos out there. There's some other players that have some pro com videos out there. But one of the things you'll notice when you watch those videos is that nowhere in those videos are people arguing. Nowhere in those videos, at least for Bolo, I'm sure there's some others that there, like we talked about, there's some players that made it there. I don't know how. And they're pretty toxic, right? But if we're talking about Bolo specifically, the guy, anytime I've ever tuned into his stream, anytime I've watched any of his, montage videos, any of his stuff, have I ever seen him be toxic to anyone, right? And that's probably exactly what we're talking about. These pro players probably sit in these meetings and talk about this exact stuff. Or maybe he's just that way in general, right? He understands these things on his own. Who knows? I've never talked to the guy. But positivity, it's just humankind to be negative, right? So if we're basically, it doesn't matter what happens, whether it's in life or the video games, people just focus on the negative. So it's a constant battle to be positive, and it's so easy to be negative, right? So if I tell a team they need to work, every team that I meet with, I tell them that they need to have one or two hype players, because nobody does that, right? Sometimes when you watch montage videos, there's the guys in there that when someone makes a good play, they're really hyping them up, like yelling, like let's go, getting everybody pumped, right? That's what you need in scrims. You don't need people being negative. You need people being positive. So when the team has a good round overall as a team, why would you not sit there and be like, yo, everybody did such a good job on this, like that was a perfect take? Or if you're support, and this is, oh man, the support players live such a rough life. If you're a support player, right, and you're the entry and you're coming in on this dude's drone, he gives you a good call out, you get one or two picks and you're in sight, you guys plant, win the round, right? Why would you not compliment your droner on that? Because he got you those kills. He, like, there are plenty of droners out there who are not good at droning, right? And this guy, he drones you in, you get some kills. This is a consistent thing with him. He's such a good droner. Why are we not building that up? That's such an important thing, like, and it's such a undervalued skill. But no one spends the time to be pumping up those guys. Like, let's go, man. Good job. Like, nothing, nothing. When an IGL has a really good round directing the team overall, no one's saying to this guy, yo, man, that was so good. You see what I'm saying here? Nobody spends the time saying and doing these things. Instead, it's constantly, if you mess up, you're a piece of garbage, whatever. There's just so much negativity. But I guarantee if you switch this mindset and start focusing on the positives, then your team is going to become more consistent, right? Because everybody is sitting there in high spirits. And this game is very emotion based, right? So when, like we talked about, if a team is doing really well, the team is very high emotionally, doing like everybody's happy, feeling good. When the team is doing bad, everybody's down in the dumps. Maybe people are like thinking they're doing really bad this game or whatever. This is where you need to constantly be building people up, making sure that team spirit is high, and your team will always perform at a higher level. So that's the first set here. I know I touched on a lot of stuff, but like I said, this is stuff that I don't think anybody really ever touches on. So the next thing is time utilization, which I guarantee I've touched on in my Vaude reviews and other videos that I'll ever make. It's something that any team that has worked with me probably gets annoying hearing this. But it's one of the most important things in this game. So every VOD I do, pretty much every team has failed in this aspect of the first one, time in game. Very few times have I ever done a VOD review where teams are actually using their time correctly. This is one of the first things I fix. Attitude, first problem I touch on any VOD review for any new team, and then the next thing I touch on is time in game. So when we're talking about time in game, we're talking about how you're using your time. So when you think about operator phase, when you think about prep phase, when you're in operator phase, you should be talking about what the lineup is, what utility they have. If you're attackers, where do you need, we're going to need to focus our ash charges on these, bubbles or shields, whatever. Like, you need to make sure that everybody knows their job, number one. And number two, you need to make sure that your entries understand, especially at the T3 level, that you're not just going in to get a kill, right? That's your initial job. You go in, get a kill if you need to take some territory. But then your ultimate job is like, oh, we got to deal with this Banshee, or oh, we got to deal with this bubble, this shield, whatever. That's their next task. If they didn't die in the initial entry, is to get rid of that stuff so that you can perform your plant. Because everything in this game should be gauged towards planting. A lot of the times teams never get the plant off, and that's based on what's happening in the round. But I think a lot of teams, especially in T3, never go in with the intent of planting. It's always the intent of just like killing everybody. There's multiple times where they could plant and they don't plant, right? So when we're talking about time in game, we're talking about how you're using your time. That way, you can you have all these extra seconds like in op phase and prep phase where you can be talking about your plan, and instead the average team, back to the ranked mentality, they're talking about the kill they got last round, they're talking about some stupid crap like what they ate for lunch today, whatever the hell it is. It's totally meaningless and has no point, like no place in what's going on in the game, right? So this is another big thing that a lot of people have a hard time overcoming because they want to talk about what they ate for lunch today instead of what's on the board, how they're going to deal with it. So if your team has any ambition, or you as an individual have any ambition of pushing out of T3 into CL or PL, you got to learn how to use your time adequately. It's the most important thing. So pretty much touched all over that. There's not much more to say. Besides the fact that if you're using your time correctly, it's going to be easier to IGL. It's going to be easier to deal with utility. It's going to be easier to know what you're running into in terms of like all that stuff. It's just repeating myself at this point. So next part is time out of game. We're always trying to maximize our time in any capacity of this game, whether it's in game or out of game, right? So if we're talking a team has a 4 to 6 day split of training, and you've established, you're a more established team where you've got most of your dry runs down, most of the maps. The next big thing on that checkbox that you need to start working on is what I like to call admin day, and that's where either that day is an established day, which 100% needs to be mandatory, because in my experience, when this happens, suddenly players, and this is, I don't know if they're thinking they're smart or something, but if you pay attention, it'll be a consistent thing where if you're not scrimming, suddenly they got something coming up instead that they're not going to be there for a Vaude review or whatever. But so this needs to be mandatory. If a player can show up to a scrim, whether this is boring or not to go through, just like this video, it's essential to the process. It's essential to improvement. So you need to make it mandatory. Players need to show up. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But back to the admin day thing. Basically, if your team is doing a 4 to 6 day split, you need to spend at least one day where you cut scrims short, or you need to spend one whole day of where you're doing either Vaude reviews, or if you guys have noticed that a positioning in your strat is wrong, or you're running into a consistent problem in your strat where it's weak on a side and you continuously lose to it, whatever, or team issues where droning is failing or flank watch is failing. You see, there's just a huge list of problems that any team, whether it's Pro League, Challenger League, T3, are running into in this category, right? So this time out of game, using your admin day, is where you fix these things. It's where you do your VOD review. It's where you fix your holes in your strats. It's where you talk about team problems if there's an issue between players, because there's always some kind of issue, whether players not watching flanks or players not droning correctly, or when they die they're not getting on cameras. There's all these things that always need to be fixed. This game is so diverse in the fact that there's just so many things that you have to improve on, so many things that you have to learn, especially when you're transitioning from ranked to competitive. Um, so when we're talking about time out of game, this is how you use it, especially on your own time outside of practice. You should be studying things, whether it's streamers on YouTube, like pro players, when they're streaming, you're checking them out, seeing what their comms are like, whatever. Time out of game is essential, and it's a huge piece of the puzzle that everybody overlooks. And like I said, in my experience, people will constantly dip out if it's not a scrim day, and they want to only scrim, but they don't want to do the important things. And this is one of the most important things, VOD reviews, time out of game, out of the whole process, and it's very overlooked. So if you're thinking about pro players, obviously it's unrealistic that any T3 team could do this, but pro players do this stuff every day. They do VOD reviews every day. They have team meetings every day. And so if we're going to break it down to a T3 team, then, at least needs to be one day a week where you go through this type of stuff, where you either you cut scrims short so you can do this, or you just cut scrims totally out during that day so that you can do this. And I guarantee your team is going to grow at a much faster pace talking about these problems, fixing these problems, than if you were to just scrim every day. Because every team, not every team, but I'd say like 85-90% of teams that I meet with, for some reason, think that just scrimming every day is going to make them better. And what happens eventually is you hit a wall. You can't overcome that wall because you're not doing what needs to be done to fix it, right? So if you're just going in scrimming every day and you're doing the same thing, I pretty much call that droning, where you're just going through the motions, but you're not actually learning anything. And that's where you see a lot of teams start disbanding or doing roster changes, because they've scrimmed, and they think that if they scrimmed all these scrims, that suddenly they're going to become a challenger level team. And it's not going to happen, right? Because you have to do these steps in order to get there. So eventually they're going to hit this wall and they're going to start losing, or they can't beat these teams. Maybe they have a regular scrim friend, whatever it is. They hit this wall and they can't overpass it. So in their minds, the answer is to change players, or a player leaves and then the team disbands, whatever. And then they go start on a new team, and they go through the same process, and it's just a repeating process, and they never make it anywhere because they never spend the time to do this type of thing. Whether it's boring, whether they're interested in it, it doesn't matter to me. It's one of the most important aspects of the game, and you have to do it. There's no getting around it. So the next part on this list would be timeline. This one's pretty short. Basically, if you're in T3 or T2 or even bottom Pro League, prior to this season, right? Pro League almost never changed spots. You might get a fifth and a sixth spot change, but the top three were always the top three. Pretty much the middle pack, and if we're talking about NA anyway, pretty much the middle pack was the middle pack and the bottom were the bottom. Like there was no moving in the standings besides that. And I can assume, you know, and this is my experience speaking with a lot of T3 teams, is that number one, they have a failure of support staff, which we'll talk about later. Number two, they're not using their time correctly. Number three, attitude, obviously. And then the other big things is that, and if we're talking timeline and you're in T3, there's a lot of teams in T3 and T2 who have been grinding there for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and they're grinding there and they're hard stuck, right? How do we get how do we make it out of that hole, right? How do we dig ourselves out? That comes to timeline and how obviously how we're using our time. But if we're a T3 team and we want to get into Challenger League, the way to get there is by using your time right, like adequately, right? Which is time utilization. But when we go into a practice each day or each week, what are our goals? So if we did our time out of game, our Vaude review, we saw what problems we're running into. And if you do this weekly, right, or if you got a player on your team who takes the time to watch these daily, they're going to notice that there's a very consistent issue in your gameplay, whether it's lack of droning, whatever, right? People are getting too aggressive when they don't need to be. There's the comms, there's always a million answers to this, right? So if you're talking about timeline, then when we come into practice each day, each week, what are our goals? What are we working on today? No one ever sets these little goals for their team, and that's one of the biggest reasons that teams aren't improving, because they're not actively trying to improve. They're just expecting to improve. So when you come into a scrim today, or you go into your scrim tomorrow, or you go into your league match, whatever it is, you have to have a goal for this one, right? So, I like to tell teams that they need to switch things up. So if you go into the scrim today and your team is very structured, right, and you suffer against very aggressive teams because they're always swinging and peeking, then you need to change something up today. And your goal for today is to be maybe a little bit more aggressive than you usually play, because you play very conserved. Your team is very conserved. You need to, if you're always doing a standard take and you never adapt to the other side, then we're going to adapt to the other side today and spend our day doing a take from this side. Like that, you have to go into each scrim, each day, each week with goals in mind on how to improve your team, or it's never going to happen. You have to actively be wanting to improve. It's just like the whole six-pack abs thing. There's no way to get six-pack abs without hard work, nutrition, all this stuff combined, right? You can't just wake up in the morning and have six-pack abs. It's the same thought process here. Your team is not going to get where you want it to be in a reasonable amount of time, which is the timeline, without using your time correctly, without having goals set in mind, and without actively trying to improve your teamwork overall. So you need to have like a timeline in place, like this is what we're doing today, this is what we want to accomplish this week, whatever. You just need to have goals, a timeline to achieve those goals, and work on those goals so that you don't get landlocked. Because once you get landlocked, again, like we talked about, that's when teams start falling apart. Time spent, or overall time spent playing. So what we're talking about here is if you're spending 20 plus hours a week playing this game, back to our original thing here and all of this, and you're achieving nothing, then you're basically wasting your time at that point. So overall time spent playing, if you're spending 20 plus hours a week playing this game, then you should try to be doing the best to get something out of it, because why would you spend, unless you're just doing it as a hobby, then that's great, do you. But if you're actually in here to try and push into CL, trying to push into PL, whatever your goals are, um, then you need to be using this time correctly. So if you're spending 20 hours a week, you should be trying to get the most out of those 20 hours a week. There's a in my one of my hobbies is drawing, right? So I watched this video one time, and they're talking about in the drawing video that they're comparing people, right? So one person could spend 1,000 hours drawing, and another person could spend, let's say, 200 hours drawing, 500 hours drawing, right? They can achieve the same amount of accomplishments, or whatever you want to talk about it. They can be just as good or better than the person who spent 1,000 hours drawing, because they use their time correctly. They focused on the right things. They practiced the right things. They didn't just like drone, like what I call droning, where you're just like you're just doing the, what do you want to call it? You're just going through the motions, right? But you're not actually achieving anything. You're not actually focusing on anything. And that's where we get into this, what I call droning, is you're just going through the motions. So again, this is where timeline, time utilization, all these things matter. And it's all about it, whether it's in game, whether it's out of game. You always want to maximize your time. You always want to spend your time correctly, because at the end of the day, if you're spending 20 plus hours a week playing this game, you don't want to be wasting your time, right? So next thing on here is Vaude Reviews, which we've already talked on, but I just want to touch on it because, I can't, like I said, I've done this for several teams, and either you got people who are not paying attention during Vaude Reviews, you got people who aren't showing up during Vaude Reviews, whatever it is, they just don't have any interest in Vaude Reviews, and it's very overlooked. But it's one of the things that will be the quickest way to see what kind of problems your team is having, right? Because you'll see that your team's timing is off, you'll see that coordination is off, whatever. You'll see people who are consistently making crazy plays when they shouldn't be, like whatever the problems are. This is where you can just actively see it, and then you can go into your stuff like we talked about before, talk about it, fix it up. It's the fastest way to improve, but the most overlooked thing in terms of improving. So that's all I'll say on it, because we've kind of talked about it already. Discipline, pretty self-explanatory. Everything that I spoke about will take discipline to achieve. You could be a mindless drone, just playing the game and scrimming. That's pretty easy. But, we don't want anything that's worth having is through hard work, right? So you could sit there and scrim every day, and that's the easy answer, but you're going to find that you're going to get stuck. You're not going to improve, and that's going to cause problems. So discipline is like what we're talking about. All this stuff is taking all these things into account, actively be working on them. It takes discipline. It's hard to sit there and do this stuff instead of just coming into the game playing. You know what I mean? But that's one of the most crucial things, because this is all of it combined. It's obviously the most important thing, because it's a daily struggle, just like ego, just like respect. You have to come in daily, be motivated, achieve your goals, and that way your team can be successful, because this is a team game. So this is where everybody on the team needs to be able to, what I call, like I said, hype man. You should have one or two at least, but everybody's going to have a bad day, and it's up to somebody else to step up and try and improve that player's day and help raise team morale so that you guys can get the most out of your practice. If you're consistently coming in with bad attitudes and no one's trying to fix it, or if you personally have a consistent bad attitude and you're not working on that individually, your team is going to suffer, because this is a team game. And just like we said before, when the team is successful, it's because the team played well together. When the team fails, it's because the team failed together. There is no individual that isn't part of that equation. It's a team game. At some point in every game, each player can sit there and reflect and think, if I'd have done this, if I'd have said this, if whatever, that the game could have been different, right? So if you're trying to make it into SCS, top T3 leagues, ESA, SFCL, I think it is now, can't remember. CL, PL, these are all super important steps to be thinking about. These are all daily tasks that you need to be going through. Everybody needs to be focusing on. It's an active thing that constantly needs to be. All right, I'm back. I guess my headset died mid sentence, but anyway, you got my point. So discipline, one of the most important things. So last thing we're gonna touch on, hopefully if my mic is working, because that would suck if I went through all this and didn't catch the last end of it, is support staff. So a lot of people sleep on this type of thing at all levels. It doesn't matter, pro level, CL. I can watch any VOD, do VOD reviews on any level of team, and they are gonna be constantly, have mistakes that they're constantly making all the time, especially the lower level PL teams, CL teams, all that stuff, especially obviously T3, which is what we focus on mostly right now. Uh, so limited options in terms of finding support staff, especially good support staff. So obviously, when you're in CL, PL, people are getting paid. So there's, a better, at least I would think, I hope that PL, CL teams aren't picking people just because they're friends with them, but they're actually picking the best people that they can find. But again, we can look at replays and see that teams are coming in, week out, and making the same mistakes. So in my mind, this is just my opinion that support staff is failing in a way, right? Because they're not helping these teams improve. So anyway, T3 obviously you have very limited options because most likely you aren't going to be paying people. These are people that are coming up, as well, trying to learn. They got a lot of lessons to learn on their own, just like the players do. So it's a little bit rougher, but you got to do what you got to do, especially in terms of this. Especially if you got to make strats, whatever. This is all time-consuming stuff. So if you can find somebody who's going to make you strats or whatever, then that's great. But if you're looking to push into T2, you need to make sure that the support staff can do more than just, joke around with you and make strats. In reality, the support staff should be the foundation of your team. They are the leaders of your team. If the play, these are the people that if players have any kind of issues, they can come confide in. They're not worried that when they come talk to you that you're going to go over and gossip with so and so and tell them, yo, whatever. Guy told me this, and you get my point. Gossip. I'm not a gossip guy, so I can't give any good explanations. But anyway, so gossip is a no-go. But anyway, so point is, they got to be able to confide in you. They got to be able to respect you. They got to be able to trust you. These are the most important things. Is if you're trying to be a coach or if you're looking for support staff, is these attributes, right? Because they're the ones who are going to be your biggest critics. They're the ones who are going to be watching your VODs. They're going to be the ones making your strats. They're going to be the ones telling you you're making the wrong plays and that you need to fix this or blah, 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 whatever. There's a huge list of crap that you can go through, and they are the ones who are going to be doing it, right? Your analyst, your coach, whatever you got as a support staff. And so you got to be able to trust them. You got to be able to confide in them, right? So, but if you were talking about support staff, they need to be the best leaders on the team. No ifs, ands, or buts, because what's going to happen on every team? There's going to be conflict. There's going to be people arguing. There's going to be toxic players, whatever, all these things, right? And the leadership, the support staff, are the ones who have to deal with that stuff, right? So if you're a timid person, then you probably shouldn't be a coach, or you probably, maybe an analyst, maybe a strategic coach, but there's got to be someone on your team that can deal with confrontation. There's got to be someone on your team who can solve confrontation. There's got to be people on your team who can do these specific things, right? So if you're looking for support staff or you have support staff and they are not able to meet these standards, then your team is going to suffer for it, because this is a team again, and teams are going to need this type of stuff because this is a competitive game. People are grinding. It's only a matter of time until people start running into the issues of where they're arguing, where you have a toxic player, whatever, and these people have to deal with it. Another thing that I see is on Twitter. There's a lot of players who, because of COVID-19, are suffering, like mental issues in terms of like, maybe depression, whatever, right? Either they have support staff there that can talk to them and help them through those things, or there's other options. But support staff is a very like wide space, right? People, you got to be able to do a lot of different jobs as support staff. And, I don't know what kind of funding pro teams have or CL teams, and especially obviously not T3 teams. But this is an important thing for everybody to have, obviously in life, but in the game, because this is a stressful, long, grindy game. And there's going to be times where you have to be available to talk to players. And that's the other thing about support staff is you pretty much got to put your gaming aside. Like I love this game. I almost never play this game because I'm either talking to players, I'm doing Vaude reviews, I'm making these videos. So that's the most important aspect to me. And as well as if you're looking for a support staff or if you have support staff, their biggest priority needs to be taking care of the team in whatever way they need, right? Some teams need this, some teams need that. Whatever, you got to be that person that wears all hats that can help players to the best of their ability. And your biggest priority is not actually playing the game anymore. So those are just the things, those are just the things that I wanted to touch on, what I think that a team needs to be successful, and some things that, like I said, a lot of other people don't touch on. I know this is pretty boring. Like I said, I don't have any kind of special stuff, but I'm here to just help people become smarter and better. I'm not here to entertain you. So thank you for your time. If you have any suggestions, feel free to let me know. If there's anything you guys want me to cover, let me know. I see Pro League has finally started up, so I might start going through some Pro or CL VODs. But if there's any T3 teams, I'd be open to doing a VOD review of like T3 team that sends me their VOD, so that we can hear comms and stuff like that. But if I do that, I need to make sure whatever VOD you send me needs to have all the comms. I don't want to get a VOD where the guy playing for some reason it didn't record his recording, whatever. Like I need to be able to hear all the comms. So thank you for your time. This obviously went longer than I expected because I rambled, but enjoy your day.